Hello to everyone, Mr. Chairman, members of the Congress, dear participants of this hearing. I want to talk from the people who are still living on occupation. And this is the most dramatic period for them because these people, these Ukrainian citizens, do not have any voices. That's why we have to talk about their stories. The longer the occupation continues, the more tortures, degrading treatment and pain Ukrainian citizens will suffer. The action of the occupants aim at a systematic and intentional destruction of the Ukrainian identity in the occupied territories. They scorch it through torture, intimidation, and humiliation. It only takes them a short time to cut off the local citizens from Ukrainian news. They are left in an information vacuum now, without access to internet, mobile phone communication, or the opportunity to leave the seek refuge in Ukrainian government-controlled territories. The occupants have undertaken mass-scale filtration measures. They aim through the repeated interrogation of the local populations at revealing the destroying any potential resistance to the occupying regime. You have to know that 1.3 million of Ukrainians already had experience with filtration. 224,000 of Ukrainian people, Ukrainian children are relocated from occupied territories to Russia. And unfortunately, this process is ongoing till that time when Russia will not stop, but not because of their political will, but because of our common fights with support of free Western world. You might recall the first days after the full-scale invasion when citizens of Ukraine bravely took into the streets and met the armed Russian military with Ukrainian flags, openly demonstrated opposition of Kremlin's unprovoked intervention. In response to the courage of Ukraine, the Russian occupants met the peaceful protests with arms and shooting at places like Chaplinka, Bilozerka, Kakhovka, Kherson, and Energodar, etc. This was followed by large-scale act of terror, filtration, deportation, forced disappearance, and torture of citizens. Curbing resistance and the free will of citizens was the first step in the Russian plans for the annexation of the new occupied territories. We have to talk about that annexation will be the next stage. The next step in the plan is Russia is to organize fake referendum. And it will happen in September if we will not do something to higher price for Putin and Russia about that. So the Russian Federation must therefore by definition be recognized as a state sponsor of terrorism. A resident of Kherson, Denys Fedko, told in March how the Russian killed members of his family, including 2 minor children, with 36 shots near the Kakhovka hydropower plant. His parents, his brother's wife, and her kids, the 6-year-old Sofia and the 18-month-old Ivan, were driving in the family car. He was on the phone with his mother during the entire time and became witness to their execution. He heard the shots, the children crying, and Irina, his sister-in-law, and his mother screaming. Little Ivan was the last to be finished off. Victoria from Kherson testified that in order to leave the city by car, she had to pass 53 Russian checkpoints. Together with her husband and their child, at 20 checkpoints, the Russians freaked them, took away valuables, ordered them to undress, pat down their underwear. Today, even such difficult escaping is not longer as an option. The population in temporary occupied territories is commonly being subject to torture with electric current, beaten up, raped, and morally abused. Such act violates fundamental rights and the laws of war. They are war crimes and crimes against humanity. The goal is to destroy Ukrainians and their identity. That is why these actions constitute genocide in the 21st century. Yuliia Pustovyt, a resident of Rubizhne in Luhansk Oblast, provided her testimony to civil network Opora after being evacuated, so-called evacuated, to Russian Federation. She told us that all deportees were deprived of their identification documents by the Russians, and then they would have no freedom of movement, even in Russia. Yulia, however, managed to keep her identification documents. She had to simulate loyalty to the Russian Federation authorities and told that she had relatives in St. Petersburg who were ready to host her. After undergoing filtration and deportation to Russia, she managed to flee from the train with her children. They are now all safe in Estonia. Volunteers help her to be in a safe place. But the investigative committee of Russia is preparing to frame the Ukrainian military for destroying the city of Mariupol, despite we know the Russian army had been destroying the city for months on a daily basis. We saw these evidences in online streaming from Mariupol. Russia needs such accusation for propagandic purpose to create an informational curtain and to cancel the war crimes committed by the Russian armed forces that led to be destructed of the cities. We can expect it that the first death sentences issued to members of the Ukrainian military will be turned into systemic effort. Such accusations will become a further instrument of terror directed against Ukrainian citizens, civilians, and Ukrainian soldiers. The intentional shifting of focus away from Russian military by placing the responsibility for any atrocities on illegal armed groups is another method of Russian propaganda. And one more thing, because we have to build bridges in between territories under Ukrainian government control and occupied territories. And you have to know that even now, I have to talk that meta providers, Facebook, Instagram, messengers, which had changed its policy regarding to content intended for the temporary occupied territory. So from 26th of February, Facebook changed their policies and we don't have access because of their policies to occupied territories. This is very important to know how we can help to bridge this to build these bridges with occupied territories, because we want to continue help people on that, and we have to prevent other occupation on Ukraine, and remember that referendum is one of the tools to use nuclear weapon in the future, because you know that Russia will use this stage for this type of aggression.
Let me thank both of you for your powerful testimony, for your courage, for your willingness to be here and give us a firsthand account of what's happening in Ukraine. We read the articles, but when we hear your testimony, it really puts an exclamation point on the urgency of the issues and the atrocities of what Mr. Putin has done. So I just really want to thank both of you for your courage and for your testimonies before our committee. I'm going to ask Congressman Fitzpatrick if you want to get an answer to your question.
Sure. I don't know if you remember my long diatribe, but I think what I rounded out my question was the request had changed from our first to our second visit post-invasion. When the war had changed, the war was on very, very different footing. What is the current request? What is the current need? Alex, you and I communicate frequently. Many of your colleagues communicate frequently with me. And the situation has changed exponentially. It's changed by the day. What is the current situation? What's the current need? And I also want to reiterate everything that Alex said. We can't be lost on this moment in history. And we all ought to study history. We all ought to study September 1st of 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, and how many people across the globe were worried about provocation, they were worried about escalation. And my question to supporters of them is, how did that work out for them? We have to take this threat as serious as possible. Vladimir Putin is a war criminal. What is being committed now is genocide, and Russia is a state sponsor of terrorism. Let's start with those three basic facts, right? That's the platform that we ought to be launching from. But what does Ukraine need now? Because we just passed recently a $40 billion aid package. There's going to be another package up for consideration soon. It's being become more difficult to maintain that, that assistance and that support. So it's important we hear from you the current situation and what is it that you need more than anything right now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Representative Fitzpatrick. It's an honor to answer your question, and it's very important for us. Because we need weaponry, I said. The number one request is systems like HIMARS, which is a long-range artillery, which gives us a possibility to answer on Russian concentration of artillery. Just one number for you. Russia is shelling each day in Ukraine 60,000 heavy shells and missiles. It's not counting mines from mortars. It's just heavy shells from 100 caliber and more, and missiles. Just imagine this number. And we can't beat them in quantity. We should beat them in quality, preciseness, and range. So that's why HIMARS, even 8, which are already in Ukraine. And today I want to thank, it was announced by Secretary Lloyd Austin about 4 more HIMARS which will be sent to our country. That is very important. But even these 8 made a difference. Definitely more is better, and we ask to give us more. Our military is saying that we need at least 60 these systems. Altogether now we are promised 20 with new list which were promised today. So we desperately ask for more. And what is very important, now we are provided them with only short-range missiles, which is up to 45 miles. And there are another missiles which can be used by these launchers, which can hit for almost 200 miles. And we need them. And it doesn't mean more expenditure, because we already have launchers. We just need these missiles. And I can't understand this limitation, because why 45 miles is not escalatory and 150 miles is escalatory? I mean, I think it's quite strange. So we need to put aside these limitations. We're speaking about genocide. So that is what's important. Second thing is definitely everything about aviation. 2 things I would tell. These are fighters, because Ukraine, sooner or later, will run out of fighters. All our fighters are Soviet type. And it means that we can have new only from Russia. To change engine, we can do it only from Russia. So the only way for us is to switch to NATO standard F-15, F-16. But this is not easy process. I want to thank Congress for already passed in National Defense Authorization Act $100 million for training. But it will mean that this training will start only end of this year or beginning of next year. Then it will take half year more of training. So we will have access only in 1 year. 1 year for us is eternity. And the last thing in aviation I should add is drones. These Grey Eagle drones, which were like already discussed, but at the last moment were stopped. And now there is no like a final decision about them. And I want again to ask you to help us to receive these drones. Because after HIMARS are doing their job, disrupting logistics, disrupting Russia air defense, anti-air defense, and their command areas, after this something should finish the job. And that should be a drones or aviation. So that is also important. Thank you.
And Alex, lastly, just Ivan Bakanov, if you could comment on, this is a big deal. I could sense it when I met him. And he has been the chief intelligence officer of Ukraine for all these months. And as it turns out, as we suspected from day one, he's a problem. So if you could just comment on this, because we're going to have to answer for this here in Congress.
My answer is simple. I think from the beginning that appointing of him to this position was not a good decision, because he has never experienced insecurity, and that is a problem. And in 2019 it was done. And definitely, unfortunately, in the southern part of Ukraine, there was a failure of our Secret Service, definitely, when there were bridges which were not blown out. So there are problems. And it would be better if he would be sacked earlier, but better later than never. So finally it is done, and that is a good decision of President Zelensky.
Thank you for your question. And of course, I'm dreaming about position that Russia officially is a state sponsor of terrorism, that what is going on officially is genocide. It's not about public wording. It has to be a part of official decisions and documents for the future perspective to have accountability and justice. Because I believe that what Russia is doing, it's because USSR was not punished. Because Ukrainians had the same stories about filtration, about camping, about tortures for many, many years ago. You know that we had genocide already. We had the same during and after the Second World War. And because of Russia was one of the winners of the Second World War, it was not punished. Russia, I mean USSR. That's why I believe that we have to ask you to continue support from both parties, Ukrainian future and security in Europe through the future accountability process. This process has to be building now because we have to think about tribunal against aggression. It can be investigation against Putin personally, even now. Because we have precedents already. So only this tribunal can be a basic position to start investigation about Putin today. I have to talk about other type of tribunals. We have to support ICC. I know the position of the USA about ICC, International Criminal Court. At the same time, I hope that our partners will continue to support it. But a few days ago, official statistician about open criminal cases against war crimes in Ukraine was near 40,000 of cases. Can you imagine what it has to be done in Ukraine? We have to found it special court. We have to train investigators. We have to give them equipment and support them because it's about amount of crimes. And I don't think that we can compare this situation with some of the others. Sanctions, it's about your committee too. Sorry, Ukraine lost already $96 billion because of war in Ukraine. Do you know how much money took Russia from Europe and other states through the gas and oil? $97 billion. So Russians will have enough money to continue this aggression against Ukraine, unfortunately. And we have to think how the price will increase day by day and how Russia will not build the ally with other authoritarian and other type of regime, semi-authoritarian regime in the future, to build this ally for the future aggression against not only Ukraine, but Europe. You know about that very well. So from my perspective, official tracks has to be historical for now, because after Putin will come even worse authoritarian leader, because there is a huge request from Russian society to have such type of system, unfortunately. Thank you for your question. I briefly want to answer just a few things. First of all, if you are going to continue to support Ukraine on documentization process, it's not just documentization for documentization. We have to build this justice and institutions who will work enough and will be powerful enough in historical perspective. Now we have like a tool, joint investigation team, and few countries signed agreement to exchange the information because we have more than 6 million refugees and many of them were eyewitnesses, and we have collect the data from them and use it for the future accountability process. But you know that such instruments, it's something new for everyone in the 21st century. That's why the best brain, the best minds in the USA can be a part of the development of this justice future. And I want to highlight that the idea to have the tribunal against aggression, it's not something new, but we had just statements and declaration. We have to found this tribunal through EU mechanism, and I hope that the US will be a part of that, because I don't believe that UN can adopt any agreements which will give us a chance to have tribunal on international level. And when you ask about occupied territories, you know that there is only one answer. It's military supply for Ukrainian state, for Ukraine and Ukrainian army, because as long this process will go on, as much victims and eyewitnesses we will have in the future. And unfortunately, if Russia will try to annex these territories, we will not back it as soon as it's possible, as we hoped. But because it will be like Crimea for many other partners in the world, even from the Western civilization. Unfortunately, we had this gap during last 8 years, unfortunately. That's why my last point, please don't be tired to watch what is going on in Ukraine, and don't be tired to think how to continue support Ukraine, because it's not only about Ukraine, it's about global issue, which Russia is a part of that. Thank you.